The family of anti-apartheid activist Chris Hani and the SACP have requested an inquest into his 1993 assassination. On Friday, Hani's convicted killer, Janusz Walus, was deported to his home country of Poland after he completed his parole granted in 2022. His final release and deportation has been met with polarized reactions, while some believe that the wheels of justice turned and he served his time. The former TRC commissioner and human rights lawyer, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, is now joining us to have this conversation. Advocate Ntsebeza, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. I want to start off our conversation here before we deal with the call that has been made by the SACP as well as the Hani family, is upon reflection on the news that Janusz Walus is now being deported and being deported back to Poland. What sort of reflections did you have? What went through your mind, considering the work that you've done with the TRC?
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone, not even a member of the TRC, would have been appalled by the manner in which Chris Hani was really executed. He was killed execution style by Walus. So there is every reason for people to grieve. But he is not only he was not only, you know, a member of the SACP or a member of the ANC. On the eve of the transfer from apartheid to democracy, he was a very popular man. And he is, you know, ironically, a man who had even renounced violence as a means of bringing about change. He had now been campaigning for peace and all of those things. So everybody was shocked. And I assume that, if people are angry, firstly at the granting of him having been paroled in the first place, and now that he has departed, one understands that. But I have a problem jurisprudentially, you know, to argue against, firstly, his parole, because the highest court in the land unanimously, and the former Chief Justice Zondo, writing for a unanimous court, had given what he considered to be facts that the various ministers had considered and to be favorable considerations that need to be taken into account when one considers whether or not, after having spent a number of years in jail, whether or not he should now be released on parole. And it was a wide range of things. The behavior of Walus whilst he was in jail, the various courses that he had undergone that were aimed at rehabilitation, the fact that he was a first offender, the fact that there had been a finding by the ministry and its functionaries that he is not likely to repeat what he had done. So it's a whole host of considerations that the ministry or the people in government themselves, I mean, they had even made remarks that his conduct was commendable and that there were opportunities on his release that he would be, he would not be without employment. And so when you use, epithets like commendable, first offender, not unlikely to repeat the same kind of offense, then Chief Justice Zondo, as he then was writing for a unanimous court, couldn't find that their opposition to him being placed on parole was rational. And it was on that basis, the basis that their decision not to put him on parole after having served about 2 decades in prison.
Yeah.
Was irrational.
And
So against that backdrop, one must find it difficult, A, that they had opposed his being placed on parole in the first place, and secondly, that now there may be an issue about him having to leave without there having been an inquest. I am not sure, Aldrin, what the basis is for calling for a further inquest. I have not been made aware. I don't know what it will achieve, which the former processes had not achieved.
yeah,
There's always, oh yeah, okay, yes.
yeah. I wanted to go back to this particular element. Like, if you look, for instance, at the TRC application that came from Clive Derby-Lewis as well as Janusz Walus. And of course, their matter had already been underway even before the establishment of the TRC. But one of the conditions there was also full disclosure. And the argument that has come from the Hani family as well as from the SACP is that there hasn't been full disclosure. And I wonder what full disclosure even looks like, and the test that would have been used by the TRC back then, that there wasn't full disclosure. And also the other elements that they didn't meet in terms of the requirement to actually have a decision that is being taken by the TRC to say that let's give them amnesty.
Well, you know, full disclosure is when the amnesty committee considers whether to grant an applicant amnesty or not. As you will recall, the Act, the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act, demanded that a person must not only make a full disclosure in relation to the offenses in relation to which he was applying for amnesty. The amnesty committee had to consider also whether what, you know, the perpetrator had done was, you know, in line with the, violation of human rights in the 34-year period, 1960 to 1994, that the amnesty committee had to consider. So that's why there was an investigative unit. And the investigative unit would consider the facts that were put before it by the person who was seeking to get amnesty. And it was on being satisfied that, you know, the person applying for amnesty had made a full disclosure of all the facts, you know, in relation to which he was applying to amnesty, he or she was applying for an amnesty. And if, you know, the amnesty committee, you know, found that there had not been a full disclosure, then the amnesty committee, you know, would deny amnesty, and then the person, if the person was charged, would go to jail. In the case of Walus, as I understand it, I do not know if he had applied for amnesty, but seeing that he was in jail, the only available remedy to him was for him to seek to be paroled in terms of the act that governs the release of people on parole.
Yeah, he also did apply for amnesty, and one of the arguments that he had made was that he was quote unquote coerced into making these decisions and also to carry out on this assassination. But with that said as well, is this question of what does justice look like? What does a sense of justice look like for the victims or the families of victims of apartheid-era crime, considering that the work that the NPA had called you on to do as well?
I don't know whether justice in the view of all those who feel that the murder of Chris Hani was heinous, is that he did not get justice. You will recall that ordinarily in South Africa, if it was not for the abolition or of the finding of the death sentence being unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court in Magwanyana's case, this is a person who would, as the law was then, have been sentenced to death. Well, the law did not permit him to be sentenced to death, and therefore he had to serve a life sentence, which he had served for almost 2 decades by the time he was considered for parole. So justice should be seen in the light of the prevalent jurisprudence in South Africa at the time that Walus came for trial in the first place, and whether in terms of the law as it then was, he should or would have been sentenced to death, or whether in the TRC he had made a full disclosure. I am not aware that either the SACP or anyone who believes that there are facts that the Amnesty Committee ought to have considered, or there are facts that Walus has which he has not disclosed, which would have made it possible for lawyers and for everyone in society acting rationally in light of the facts, whether those facts have been made available at any forum, whether it was in the criminal court that sent him to jail for life, or even before the parole board. There has been a cry that there is more to it than meets the eye in the reason for murdering Chris Hani. And that, unfortunately, when Walus is now allowed to go away, and I do not know in what way he could have been prevented from going to his home country when he had completed the period when he was a prisoner on parole. So I even in the investigative unit, we were not able to get to what these other facts are. And I have not heard either from Dimpo, the wife of Chris Hani, or from the South African Communist Party comrades. What are these other facts? What are these other disclosures that Walus should have made? Because they would have assisted the process if they had been able, or if they had come forward to say, for instance, in his application for amnesty, he has mentioned A, B, C, and D. We are aware that E, F, and D, G have not been mentioned by him, and that should be enough to deny him amnesty, or even serving the interests of justice. We know that the National Prosecuting Authority has been aware of facts A, B, C, D, and E, and yet it has not done anything. So justice has not been done in this case. So it is for society, and I would be glad, and I'd be one of those who would analyze the evidence that there is that has been brought forward, which Janusz ought to have made available to everyone, even in his application for parole, which he did not. So I don't know what an inquest would achieve when there is no information on which those who say there must be a reopening of the case against Walus would bring.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible then to close this particular chapter?
Well, possibly I would rather say it's not probable that this case would be reopened on the facts as they are. But I can tell you now, if tomorrow the facts that those who clamor for more information, which they say Walus had, the moment those are brought, to the attention of either the NPA, this TRC unit that they have now established, then the better it would be. And that probably, explains why there's been a clamor for the fact that he has been deported.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether there would have been any legal basis to hold him in South Africa when it is clear that there was no basis to do so. He had served his time. He had, in terms of the law in South Africa, he had been put on parole. He had finished that period. And we take into account the ministers and some of the things that they had said about his conduct having been commendable, etc. Yeah. And the absence of these facts or evidence that would throw a different light to what we now know, on the basis of which he should be tried and be made.
And that, of course, the argument that you make, it is legally speaking, it is what it is. But if we flip it and we speak politically, and I just quickly, as we conclude the conversation, Advocate Ntsebeza, I just want you to quickly reflect as well on the interview that Aaron Ruth had done with Clive Derby-Lewis, and the interview was only released after Clive Derby-Lewis had passed on. And in the interview, Aaron Ruth had asked Clive Derby-Lewis why the target was Chris Hani and not President Nelson Mandela. And his answer was that Chris Hani was radical. He was uncontrollable by the ANC's high authorities. As far as we were concerned, he was enemy number one. So that is, of course, speaking politically. And again, it brings me back to this question that you say that, is it probable for this chapter to come to an end, considering the political intention behind what had taken place in 1993?
Yeah, yes. Alden, I still say those who have information and evidence that would have put a better and a brighter light on what Walus had done, why he did it, then that evidence would be helpful for certainly the administration of justice insofar as the victims are concerned. And I think Dimpo, once she is in a position to get this other evidence, which shows that Walus had not disclosed everything at the TRC, I think she would also be very glad. But nobody has ventured to give us that evidence.
Okay.
And that has worried me for the best of times, at the best of times.
Advocate Ntsebeza, unfortunately we've run out of time, but I thank you so much for making time for us this morning.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. That's the former TRC Commissioner and Human Rights Lawyer Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza.